keynote speaker. His name, you already know him, is Mr. Friedman, and he's an international human trafficking expert who has been working for 27 years. He's the co-founder and CEO of the Nikon Club, a Hong Kong-based organization that works to stop human trafficking. Please welcome Mr. Friedman.
Is my mic on? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, it's that guy again. Oh my gosh. He won't go away. Okay, well, thank you all very much for participating in the simulation. I really appreciate your attention and your involvement and so forth. So what I'm going to be talking about is human trafficking and modern-day slavery. How many of you know something about human trafficking? How many of you know enough to come down here and co-present with me today? Really? Nobody? Okay, I guess I have to do this by myself now. Okay, so to begin with, when most people think about human trafficking, that's what they think about: forced prostitution. I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but I'm going to say a little bit because I think it's important. This is a really important part of human trafficking because there are 4.5 million women and girls in forced prostitution around the world. Now, my first exposure to this was 25 years ago. I was living and working in Nepal. I was a public health officer. My job was to basically work with the Nepalese government to make people healthy. At that time, we were finding people who were 12, 13, 14 years old who were HIV positive, young girls, couldn't understand what was happening. So we would go and talk to them, and they told us a story. And the story went something like this. A human trafficker would go into the village and show a bunch of money. He wanted everyone to think that he was a rich guy. He would then go and say, I'm looking for a wife. I don't want a wife from the urban area. They're too difficult. I want a village wife. He would find a young person. He would get to know her. He would go to the family and say, I want to marry your daughter. The family was very happy. Wow, this guy's going to marry the daughter. They're going to take care of her. They're going to take care of us. 2 days later, they would actually go through the wedding ceremony. After that, he'd say, I'm going to take her to the capital, Kathmandu, but instead of taking her there, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district, where prostitution takes place. And he would basically sell her to the brothel, and she would have to work in that industry for about 2 or 3 years, until many of them got AIDS and ended up coming back to Nepal. Now, I was hearing this story over and over again, but I didn't understand the real evil of it until I actually went to India, to those brothels. I was asked by the Indian government to do public health checks. I went into one of them, and there was a very young girl who was forced into prostitution. This girl saw me, ran up to me, and wrapped herself around me and said, save me, they're doing terrible things to me. I had a police officer with me. I told him I'd like to get this girl out of here. He said, well, you can't do that. I said, what are you talking about? You're a police officer. He said, well, where we are, we try to take her out, something terrible will happen to us. So to make a long story short, left, came back with more police, but of course the girl was gone. Now I tell this story because, unlike probably many of you in this room, when I was 15 years old, I had no intention of being an activist. I was going to get a good job, I was going to make a lot of money, I was going to live the good life. But life conspired against me. When I went to Nepal and did this work, I kept having these terrible human rights violations put right in front of me. Until eventually I did what a lot of activists eventually do. I surrendered to it and said, okay, now that I know about this, I can't turn my back. And that was 25 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. But it's not just women and girls in prostitution. There are men and boys on fishing boats. Now, what happens is, if you're living in Cambodia, eventually a lot of young boys drop out of school at around 13, 14 years old. Then the says, okay, well, you have to work. So the boys are sent to Thailand to try to find some work. So they're looking around for work, they're looking around for work. Eventually, they're starting to run out of money. Human traffickers who are in the community see this, go up and say, hey, looks like you need some help. Let me lend you some money. Okay, well, now that you have my money, you have to stay with me, but guess what? I'm going to take you down to the ocean. I'm going to put you on a boat, and the boat will go out for about 3 months. You'll catch a bunch of fish. You'll make a lot of money. Life is going to be good. But that isn't what is going to happen. The boy gets brought down to the boat. He gets on the boat. The boat goes out, but it doesn't go out for 3 months. It goes out for 4 years. This person will work 18 hours a day, every single day. If he doesn't work that hard, he gets beaten, he gets tortured, food is taken away from him. That is his life. And that's kind of like the simulation that we were doing today. For a period of time, he lost control. To get him to work, they give him strong drugs. The drugs stimulate him, so he works all the time. The only food he will eat is rice and fish. No fruits, no vegetables, nothing nutritious. Imagine if all you ate was rice and fish for 4 years. Your body wouldn't be in good shape at the end of that period of time. If he gets injured, if he gets sick, if the captain doesn't like him, they don't bring the boat in. They just throw him overboard. So there's a lot of murder associated with this. At the end of the 4 years, the boat comes in. The guy says, give me something. Give me some money. Captain says, no, I don't have to give you any money. You're illegally in my country. Go away. So the guy says, okay, I'll go and tell the police. Captain says, go ahead, tell the police. We own the police. Because of corruption, nobody's going to do anything. This is an example of human trafficking. Now, we did a sweatshop simulation. A sweatshop situation often has people doing repetitive things over and over and over and over again. These people are real people in a sweatshop who basically from 6 in the morning until 10 o'clock, all they do is peel shrimp. That's their life, 7 days a week. Now, the story behind this goes like this. This particular factory here, a person from Myanmar goes to Thailand and he's looking for work. He hears that near the ocean in a location called Sumat Sakan, there are lots of factories. He goes and knocks on the door of the factory. Factory owner comes out and says, what do you want? The person says, I'm looking for a job. Factory owner says, okay, I'll give you a job. I'll pay you 300 Hong Kong dollars a month. That's not very much money, as you all know. It's about $50. Okay? This person, though, has never made more than $25. He's thrilled. He's excited. The guy says, you can get the job, but you have to stay in the factory. You can't leave. He accepts the job. He goes into the factory. And he starts working. And every single day, wakes up at 6, works until 10. But at least in the back of his mind, he knows he's going to get some money that he can send home. After about 2 months, he goes to the factory owner and says, I'd like to be paid. Factory owner says, you know, I forgot to tell you one thing. I'm giving you $300 to be here, but guess what? It costs me $320 to have you live in my factory. You owe me money. And until you pay it back, you can't get out of here. So every day that these people work, they get deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. And before we did the raid and rescue, there were about 400 people in this factory who had been there for 5 years, working under a very similar situation from what you experienced in the simulation, and that was their life. Once a month, they would take one of the workers into the back and beat them up until they were bloody. They would take a photograph, they would show everyone to say, if you try to leave, this is what's going to happen to you and your family. This is another example of human trafficking. Okay, there are children involved in this. You can see this is a brick factory in Bangladesh, a mine in Pakistan, a Vietnamese shoe factory. You have a kid working in a fireworks factory. That child up on top is 2 years old. I lived in Bangladesh for 5 years, and we experienced a lot of 2-year-olds being trafficked from Bangladesh to the Middle East. Now, those of you who have children or brothers and sisters that are 2 years old, you know that you can't get them to sit and do manual types of things. They don't have the attention span to do that. So what do you do with the 2-year-old? Well, you put them on the back of a camel. Why? Because if you put an infant on the back of a camel, the infant screams and cries, and what does the camel do? It runs. And so they race camels by having 2-year-olds on the back because they're very light. They don't slow the camel down. By the time the child is 5 years old, they're starting to get a little bit heavy. They slow the camel down. So they take these little boys and they throw them out onto the street. So at a time when most young boys are starting kindergarten, going off to school, starting their life, you have a 5-year-old little boy by himself on the street in a country he doesn't know, a language he doesn't know, and he has to fend for himself. That's another example of human trafficking. Okay, so I worked for the United Nations for 6 years. I ran one of the larger human trafficking programs around the world. Now, when you work for the United Nations, there's a definition for everything, and this is the definition that we have for human trafficking. So the way this works is, you have 3 parts for adults. You have an act, one of these, by means of one of these, for the purpose of exploitation. So the way this works is that if you recruit a person using fraud for the purpose of exploitation, you have trafficking. If you transport somebody with threats for the purpose of exploitation, you have trafficking. Seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? It's very clear. It helps you to understand if you have human trafficking or not. For children, you don't need the second category. If you recruit or transport or harbor for the purpose of exploitation, you have trafficking. Okay, so for years we've been using the terminology human trafficking. But then what happened is, some people started asking the question, is trafficking really the term we should be using? Doesn't trafficking sound like the movement of something from one place to another? It could be drugs, it could be arms, in this case it's human beings. Is the movement of a person really the problem? Well, not really. It's what they move into. And so what happened is people started to say, maybe instead of calling it human trafficking, we should call it something else. Let's call it what it is, slavery. Why? Because if a person doesn't get paid, if a person can't move, if there's violence associated, threats against them and their family, if there's illegal debt, if their documents are taken, what else do you call it? It's slavery, right? Now, they don't just say slavery because the slavery of 150 years ago was different. So they call it modern slavery. How many of you in this room are surprised that there are slaves in the world today? If you are, raise your hand. Raise it high so I can see it. Okay. You know, every time I say this, I'm still surprised, and I do this for a living. There's lots of slaves. In fact, you know, one of the things that I sometimes get when I do a presentation like this is somebody will kind of say, come on, Mr. Friedman, maybe there are a few slaves in some location, but there's not really that many slaves, right? We can't have that many people in this situation. Well, actually, here's the number of people that are in slavery around the world. 45.8 million people. There are more slaves today than any other time in history. More slaves today than any other time in history. What you find is that 66% of the slaves are in our backyard in Asia. About 30 million people in slavery in Asia. Wow. How many of you are surprised by that? More slaves today than any other time in history. In fact, there are more slaves than Canadians. If you take the population of Canada, about 35 million, or if you were to take the smallest 120 countries in the world and add all their population up, you're still not even anywhere close to 45.8 million people. Wow. Okay, so the rate of exploitation talks about how many people enter into slavery every single year, month, day, hour, second. In a year, 9.2 million people. In a day, 25,200. So from the time the first minute of this day began till the end of this minute, there will be another 25,000 people in slavery. My hometown in Connecticut in the United States has about 25,000 people living in it. And yet every single day we have 25,000 people coming in. In the time it takes me to do this entire presentation with question and answer, there'll be another 1,000 people. Or a slave every 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, another slave. 1, 2, 3, 4, another slave. Okay, so let's bring this back to the simulation. All of the people that are in this situation are in situations where they lose control of their life. You guys lost control of your life for 25 minutes. We owned it. They're in a situation where for years and years and years, they have no choices in life. That's what their life is going to be. That's the relevance and importance of this particular issue. When I first came to Hong Kong, I went to go see the Security Bureau of the Government of Hong Kong, the Justice Secretariat, the police. I went to immigration, and they all said the same thing. We don't have any victims of human slavery in Hong Kong. We're Hong Kong. We have rule of law. We have immigration systems, processes, and procedures. But according to the Slavery Index, which is a report that comes out once a year, there's 26,000 people in slavery in Hong Kong. And when they rank Hong Kong next to other countries and territories, they're not on the top of the list, they're on the lower part of the list because Hong Kong denies that there's a problem. So who are these 26,000 people in Hong Kong? About half of them are women and girls who are forced into prostitution. They come to Hong Kong, they incur a debt, and they're told they have to work in prostitution in order to pay it back. The other half are domestic workers. Now what happens is, in a less developed country, to get a job, you don't read in the newspaper that there's a job and apply for it. Many people have to pay for those jobs. So they pay money, and they have to pay that money back. But once they enter into an agreement with the people who give them the job, the fee goes up and up and up and up and up. So they may end up coming to Hong Kong and working for 3 years, and they don't get paid any money at all because they're just paying the interest off. When it comes to China, just to give one other example, there's about 3 million people in slavery, and there's a lot of things that people are in slavery for. These particular men, I took this photograph, they were in brick factories. So here's a villager walking down the street in China, and a truck pulls up and grabs the guy and puts him in the back, and then they bring him to a brick factory, and he'll work there as long as he's not injured. What ultimately happens is every one of them gets injured. This is a shelter where they are. All of these men were injured, and so they threw them out, and they were in the shelter. And you can basically see from the expression on their face the agony that they experience. Because many people feel very similar type of agony, pain and suffering, and so forth. When you break it down into adults and children, about 25% are children, the rest are adults. But again, when most people think about human trafficking, they think it's forced prostitution. That only represents about 1/4 of the cases. The rest of them are forced labor cases. These are, again, the sweatshops that we talked about. But to take this one step further, 60% of this number is where the items that we buy the food that we eat comes from. So you might buy a cell phone, and maybe slave labor was associated with a portion of that cell phone being made. Maybe you buy some fish, and maybe it was caught from one of those young boys that's on a fishing boat in Thailand who's on a slave labor boat. Or maybe it's your clothes, or maybe it's the food that you eat. The point is, because we buy stuff, and because so many people are in this situation, we are part of the problem. We consume goods that are made by slaves. That's where it becomes relevant for us. Because we consume, we are contributing to the problem. We don't know when we're doing it, because we don't know where these locations are, but it happens nevertheless. So, how does the process work? So I'd like to offer somebody a job. Who am I going to offer a job? I'm going to offer you a job. Stand up, please. Okay. I'm going to pay you 8 million Hong Kong dollars a year. You only have to work 4 days a week. I'm going to give you 2 hours off for lunch. Okay? In addition to that, I'll give you 3 months of vacation. I'll give you a house. I'll give you a car. And you can live anywhere in the world you want. Are you interested? Yes. Who else is interested in this job? Okay. Sorry, I'm not going to give you the job, but okay. How many of you, when I was saying that, were thinking, well, that sounds too good to be true? But yet you all raised your hands, right? Okay. So imagine if you're a poor person in the developing country. And imagine that you have never earned more than 10 Hong Kong dollars a day. It's about $1 in US dollars. And then somebody comes up to you and says, I'm going to give you $20 a day, Hong Kong. And guess what? Instead of working only 16 and a half hours, you only have to work 15 hours. And I'll give you 2 hours off on Sunday. But you have to make the decision right now. Can't go home and talk to your mom, can't talk to your dad. You have to make the decision right now, or it evaporates. I'm going to give it to her, or to him. So there you are thinking, if I had that kind of money, it may seem like nothing to you, but to them it seems like a lot. If I had that kind of money, imagine what my family could have. Maybe eventually they could get a motorcycle. Maybe they could get a television or a cell phone or something. And so the person says yes, is taken away, and then they're trapped in a slavery type situation. Okay, so the second thing is debt. So let's say that you needed money because basically somebody in your family was sick. You needed 1,500 Hong Kong dollars, you need it right away. You come to me as a trafficker, and I lend you that money. You're very grateful, the operation takes place, everybody's happy. 2 days later, you try to give me 2,000 back. 2,000? 20,000? Well, you look at me and say, well, that's not fair. I tried to give you, that's not fair. I'm a criminal, I don't have to be fair. We didn't enter into an agreement. We didn't talk about what the rate would be. As a result, you give me 20,000, or I'm going to go after your parents, I'm going to go after your brother. Somebody has to come with me a year, go away, pay off that debt. So that's how people get locked into this kind of situation. Kidnapping happens sometimes. I mentioned the Chinese situation, but it really doesn't happen very often. How many of you have seen the movie Taken? Okay, that's an R-rated movie. You guys shouldn't be watching that movie. Okay, in that movie, the bad guys go into the hotel and they grab the girl from out of the bed and she's kicking and screaming, and it doesn't happen very often because it's dangerous for the traffickers. If somebody sees this, they can get in trouble. So most of what we see in human trafficking is deception and lies. Because if a person goes with you willingly, then you're not going to have a problem. You'll get through this. Okay, so everything I talked about now talks about what the problem is. Now I'm going to talk about what us NGO, UN type people do to address this issue. There's about 10,000 of us around the world, 10,000 do-gooders that go and try to stop this terrible thing of human trafficking. And basically what we have are 3 different interventions. Okay, so let me give you an example of a prevention program. In Mongolia, how many of you have visited Mongolia? Anyone live in Mongolia? Well, Mongolia is very cold. And a lot of people in Mongolia want to go to warmer places. And so what happens is in the back of the newspaper, there's an ad that says, if you're a Mongolian girl between the ages of 17 and 21, if you're beautiful and unmarried and want to make money in Japan in a restaurant, call us up. We'll send you there. You make great money. Life's going to be good. So the girls call. They get sent to Japan, and they work in the restaurant for a couple of months. And then on a false pretense, they're brought to Macau. They're forced into prostitution. They work for a couple of years, then they get sent home. When they go home, they don't tell anyone what happened because if you're from Mongolia and you're in prostitution, you're not going to get a husband. So we knew what was happening. They knew what was happening. How do you stop it? So what we did is we got a cell phone. We put a bunch of minutes on it. We hired somebody to answer the phone. And then we put an ad in the paper next to all those other ads. And the ad was very simple. It just says, before you contact anyone else, contact us first. That's all it said. So the girls would call up and say, 18 years old, I want to go to Japan. Sorry, we're not that company, but we're going to tell you what happens if you do that. So we were able to prevent them from making that mistake. The second group of people who called were people who had been trafficked, heard about this number, and would call up and say, you know, this is what happened to me. So we went from 3 cases to about 300 cases. The third group of people who called were the traffickers. They heard about us interfering with their business. They'd call and say, who are you? We're going to kill you. We're going to find you. But it was a cell phone. We had their number. We could find out where they were. We could put them in jail. So this is a good example of a prevention program. The second category is prosecution. What we're dealing with here are people who do criminal activities. They're bad guys. They should go to jail. But the problem with something like human trafficking is that it's not just one broken law. It's lots and lots and lots of broken laws. And so in order to make sense of it, they have formulas that say you need 2 of these or 1 of these or 4 of these. Law enforcement kind of shake their head and say, is it trafficking? Is it not trafficking? Seems like a lot of work. You know, I got to fill out paperwork. And so a lot of cases related to this don't move forward. The last category is protection. Now imagine if you were in a factory situation and you worked there for 4 years and every single day you did what you did today with those nuts and bolts for 17 hours or 14 hours or whatever amount of time. Can you imagine after 4 years how your brain would be? It would be like mush. You would have no thoughts, you would have no interests, you'd have no hopes, desires, and dreams. And so this last category tries to rehabilitate and get people to go back into a good life. And so they offer care and compassion and love and affection for that to take place. Okay, so when it comes to who is supposed to address this issue, well, it's supposed to be governments, but most governments don't like this topic. It's embarrassing to say we have slaves. The Hong Kong government doesn't like it, the Chinese government doesn't like it, the US government doesn't like it. So things happen, but not nearly as much as need to happen. When it comes to the United Nations, okay, I worked for them for 6 years. I'll put my hand on my heart when I say this. I believe in the United Nations system. But I spend a lot of time in 5-star hotels, eating some of the best food in the world, talking about poverty. There was a big disconnect between the people who needed the help and the people who were working in the United Nations. The group of people who did the most work were the NGOs. Okay, this isn't working. Anyway, there it is. These are the groups, the non-government organizations. They run the shelters. They do the work to basically help the people. They do the rest in rehabilitation and so forth. But there's another group. Let's go back to the numbers. Out of 45.8 million people, 75% of them are in forced labor and 60% of them are associated with supply chains. Who do you think's missing in this? The private sector. Now, if the governments don't like this topic, the private sector hates this topic. because they get blamed for all of the bad things that happen, because they're the ones that are producing the food, making the phones, making the clothes and so forth. And people often point at them and say, it's because of you that you have this problem. So basically, if consumers care about this and put pressure on the private sector then has to address this. So these are the people who are supposed to be working on the issue. Okay, so there's 10,000 of us, there's governments, there's UN, there's NGOs, there's 45.8 million people in slavery. I'm now going to tell you how many people are helped each year out of slavery. And I'm going to tell you how many people a year get arrested and put in jail. Okay? So think in your mind, out of 45.8 million, what would be a good number of people to be helped out of slavery each year? Out of 500,000 criminals, what would be a good number? And here it is. The number of people helped out of slavery each year is about 48,000 people out of 45.8 million. That's 0.1% of the victims. Out of 500,000 criminals, about 4,000 go to jail, or 0.8%. Wow. Does it look like we're having much of an impact? Not really. So do you think that the counter-trafficking, you have a question? Yeah. Yes. Prosecutions is that you go to court to basically bring people to court, but actually the cases themselves don't move forward. So you can have a variation in the number of prosecutions. Sometimes it's higher or lower. The important figure is the convictions, because you can bring somebody to court, but if they don't get convicted, then it doesn't happen. I know, does that answer your question? It's more people, more NGOs getting involved and so forth, that type of thing. Yeah, but you know, relative to the number of criminals that are there, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not even 1%. Yes?
When it comes to indictment and conviction rate, are they being extradited and tried in international court?
Very little happens in international court related to human trafficking. Much of what we see is that it's local, and the people who usually go to jail are the people who are basically the lower level, the mules, the people who move the individuals from one place to the other, the ones who own the brothels and the sweatshops, they sell them, get trafficked, and I don't know of any major international cases that have moved forward. So you can see how little we're actually achieving this. Okay, so why is it that we have so little action? Part of it is the amount of money that's generated from human slavery is 150 billion US dollars. The amount of money that goes to fight this is about 350 million US dollars. To put this number into Hong Kong dollars, that's 1.1 trillion Hong Kong dollars. So huge amounts of money being made with only a small amount of money used to fight this. In the United States, we eat $6 billion US dollars worth of potato chips. It takes 21 days of potato chip eating in the United States to come up with the amount of money that is used to fight that. You can see the issue and the problem that we're facing. A second issue is most people don't know about this issue. How many of you knew 25% of what I was talking about today before I talked about it? Okay, I'm seeing more hands than I usually see. And I would expect that because you guys are here to talk about these issues. But when I present at schools, when I present to the general public, when I present to corporations, to faith-based groups, I often don't get a single hand. If you don't know about an issue, you're not going to care about it. If you don't care, you don't do anything. And so that's one of the big problems. Secondly, a lot of people say, well, we don't think this is true. We don't think there's that many people in slavery. Well, I can't say anything other than I lived in Bangladesh for 5 years, and everywhere I looked, I saw signs of people being in forced labor type situations. And so I'm convinced that the 45.8 million is actually low.
be able to look for this, they won't find it. That's part of the problem. And lastly, again, so few people know about the fact that there's more slaves today than any other time in history. Okay, so can the problem be solved? Yes, but I think we have to do some things differently. First thing we need to do is to educate as many people as we can. Last year, I think I presented to 35 or 40,000 people. Some of my presentations were 20 minutes, some were an hour, some were 2 hours. But we have to get in front of people, we have to get them to understand this, and then we have to find a way of incentivizing them to get involved, to take a stand. I urge you all to go on to this website. It's called the Slavery Footprint. And when you get onto this website, it will ask you questions about your consuming behavior. After you fill out the questionnaire, it will estimate how many slaves you as an individual support in the world. In my case, it's about 34. My wife, 127 or something. Or she considers more than I do. It's interesting to do that because it makes it relevant to you. So I encourage you to go onto that website. Secondly, we need really good information related to human trafficking. Now, I lived and worked in Bangladesh for 5 years. How many people live in Bangladesh? Okay. Bangladesh has a lot of poverty. Well, there are people that make $2 or less a day. And so when I worked in Bangladesh, we did this real big prevention program where we spent a lot of money to try to prevent people from entering into slavery. And eventually what we did is said, well, maybe we should do a survey to find out who are the people, where do they come from, who had been put into a slavery circumstance. So we did a survey of around 1,500 people. And guess what? What we found was that the poorest of the poor, the people we think are most vulnerable to human trafficking, weren't getting trafficked. What was happening in the emerging middle class? The more affluent kids were getting trafficked. Wow. So what this means is that if you're in a very poor community, and everybody else is poor, and you don't have enough money to do much of anything, you can't travel, you don't go anywhere, you end up just staying there. But if you're in a household that starts to make a little bit of money, and you sense a little bit of prosperity, and you feel like you can get ahead of everyone else, you start taking risks. So it's the middle class that was getting trafficked. The second thing we found is that there was only trafficking in 3 different locations. And so with that information, instead of doing the entire country, we focused here and here and here, and we focused on the middle class. And then all of a sudden we started having results because the data told us what we needed to know in order to address the problem. The second thing is we have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. These are Thai students, girls from Thailand. And what happens in Thailand is a lot of girls don't make it into the 11th grade. They get to the 10th grade and they drop out. And so a percentage of them are getting trafficked. And so the community said, well, maybe the way to prevent them from getting trafficked is to keep them in school. That's a good thing, girls' education, keep them in school. So they would pay to have the girls remain in school. After 25 years of doing this program, we evaluated it. And guess what? We found that it actually increased human trafficking. Why? Because you had an expectation among the parents that my daughter's educated. She went to the 11th and 12th grade. I can send her down to the city. She can get an office job. They'd send their daughter down to the city. She couldn't compete with the kind of better networked urban people. She couldn't go home because she'd lose face. Many more got trafficked. So the important point of this is that we have to make sure that what we're doing really makes a difference. We need a plan. If there's only 10,000 of us, we need to figure out where does the general public fit in? Where do the consumers fit in? Where do the government people? Where does everyone? What do they do? How do they work together? And most importantly, where do students fit into this? Now, the interesting thing about students is I'll do a presentation and I'll ask them to get involved, and I'll often have a student come up to me and say, what can I possibly do?
I'm just a student. You're not just anything. You're a young person that has a certain amount of experience. What is your experience and how can you apply that? It doesn't matter what age you are. You can use your skills. My youngest volunteer is 9 years old. This girl watched the video, contacted me from North America and said, I'm 9 years old and I want to be a volunteer. And I went back and I said, well, you're 9 years old. And she reminded me of that show, Master Chef for Kids. And she said that the 9-year-old is the new 16-year-old, you know, when it comes to having things to offer and everything. And so I said, okay, well, you can be my volunteer. And she does internet searches for me. She identifies documents. And she's one of my best volunteers after 3 years. I've had Harvard second-year law students who aren't as good as she is. The point is that we all have skills. We all have something to offer. And those skills allow us to contribute. We need to engage the private sector. The private sector is afraid of this issue because they're afraid somebody's going to point at them and say, you're the problem. Now, obviously private sector people are involved in this, but if we work against the private sector, they go underground, they don't get involved. A new way of looking is to say, let's work with the private sector. Let's support them. Let's get them to use their resources to address the issue. And lastly, we need an abolitionist movement. Now, an abolitionist movement is a movement whereby the entire society, or in this case, the entire world, wakes up and says, this is an important enough issue, we all have to be involved. Now, that's a sand dune here. This is in, I don't know, it's in some desert. Each of the tiny little sands that are in the sand dune came together to form something as big as the pyramids. The point is that even tiny little contributing items, in this particular case sand, when added up in large numbers, adds up to something. So if all of us did one thing a year to address human trafficking, just one thing, but 10 million of us did one thing, that would add up to something quite big. So we're not asking you to change your life or give up your lifestyle or anything else. What if you only did one thing? Okay, so the organization I work with is called the Mekong Club. I work with corporations. I train them. I try to help the banks to understand the importance of this issue and to get them involved. I try to get the footwear and apparel people, the ones who make our clothes and shoes, to understand the issue and get involved. I try to work with the hotels and the airlines to help them get involved. We try to work with the stores that you buy clothes from to get involved. The assumption is if we can get them involved, imagine how much more we would have beyond the 10,000 people like us that are addressing this issue. And we've been able to get some companies to step up. Cathay Pacific started putting films on human trafficking on their airplanes. A lot of people thought that was kind of cool, and they congratulated them. We worked with British Telecom, and they heard one of our presentations, and they said, wow, what can we do to help? And so they did a contest, and the contest went to their technical people and said, if you had these 3 problems in human trafficking, how would you use technology to address the issue? When I lived in Bangkok, we went to the students. We had a film contest. We basically said, we want each school to give us a 5-minute film that shows the relationship between supply chains and human slavery. So we worked with MTV on this. So I was with the United Nations. My expectations weren't very high when I did this. I mean, who can do a film at home, right? But when the submissions came in, I must say I was super surprised how interesting and creative and useful they were. So then we had an American Idol type of event. We had judges. We gave first, second, and third prize. And those films made it onto a UN website. And for those of you that want to go off to college, it's a good thing to have on your resume. And so a lot of motivated kids got very involved in those types of things. Once again, demonstrating what people can do to get involved. Okay, so I'm going to tell a story. Back when I was in Nepal, I desperately wanted to do something to help address this issue. So I decided I was going to write a book. As part of this book writing process, I would go from shelter to shelter to talk to the girls who'd been forced into prostitution. I went to one shelter, and there was a girl named Gita. And every time I went up to Gita to talk to her, she said, no, I don't want to talk to you. But as I interviewed everyone else, she sat and listened to everything that was being said. So I was finishing up at the shelter, I was about to leave, and then Gita runs up and says, you can have my story. I was thrilled. I said, wow, sit down, let's hear what you have to say. There was about 3 or 4 of us on the other side. And over a 3-hour period, she told the worst story I'd ever heard of rape and torture and murder and disease, everything I had heard times 10. I didn't know what to say. Wow. Save any go. Okay. I didn't know what to say. So finally, I turned to Gita and I said, wow, Gita, you must be so angry at those traffickers for the terrible things they did to you. She paused and said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She said, where were you? She said that every single day she woke up praying for somebody to come and basically help her. She said she went to school until she was 12 years old. She knew that everything that was going around was illegal and inappropriate. She said she wasn't angry at the traffickers. They're just bad people being bad people. She said she was angry at the good people, at society for not caring enough to come and help her out. She said over and over again, Matt, why are you here? Why aren't you down there helping those other girls that are there? They need your help. She said that every single day those people wake up saying, where is everyone? Now, I tell this story because, there's 10,000 of us. We're helping 0.1% of the slaves every year. It breaks my heart. I've interviewed thousands of people in slavery. I could tell you stories that would make you all cry. And yet these people are in this situation. So it then begs the question, who are the people that we should be working with? For us to reduce slavery, what needs to happen? We need everyone to get involved. And we need you. We need everybody. Because we can't do it. We tried. We can't do it. So when it comes to kind of finding out why it is that we're not able to get people involved in helping to address this issue, we decided in my organization to do a survey. So we went to a bunch of students and we asked them questions about why they don't engage in getting involved in helpful activities that would make the world a better place. And we got a bunch of answers. I'm not sure I want to join. Is this my issue? Is it not my issue? Do I want to do it? I don't know. I can't really decide what it is that my issue is. Now, my issue is human trafficking. I don't know why, but it's just the thing that the most often times I'm exposed to it, it gets a reaction from me. We all have issues. We don't know what those are until we explore, until we go out there and look at, is it the environment? Is it the owls? Is it the trees? Is it people in poverty? We all have an issue. We have to figure out what that is. A lot of people say they're too busy. And if you're students, you have a lot of homework and stuff, right? You're always doing things. But here in Hong Kong, the average television watch is about 2 hours or 5 hours a day, and the average student spends 2 hours on the phone. Okay, no judgment here. I'm just saying that there are a certain amount of discretionary hours that are there that you can basically use for the purpose of doing something good, right? Once again, is it my issue? And I keep coming back to this one because as part of what you will be exposed to over the next day and a half are a bunch of issues. Ask yourself, which of these issues makes your heart sing? Which of them is the issue that hits me personally? I'm not saying you have to care about human slavery, but I'm saying you should figure out what it is that you have inside of you. Once again, the issue of I have nothing to offer. You guys know how to use computers, so you have that to offer. You know how to use phones and social networking. You have that to offer. You have the ability to create awareness. You have that to offer. You have, as that film this morning we saw, a mind that is able to problem solve to the extent that interesting, innovative things could be developed. You have that to offer. I don't care whether you're 9 years old or 19 years old or 99. We all have something to offer. And I think sometimes we're fed a diet of saying that if you are a student, you have to wait until you get into the real world before you do anything. Well, that's nonsense. The fact that you're here participating in this demonstrates that you are different to begin with. You've self-selected to be a part of this type of activity. I'm afraid of the unknown. Oh my gosh, well, what if I start this? I don't know what's going to happen. Take the step. Step over the line. Embrace the fear. Embrace the uncertainty. Feel good about it. Experiment with life. That's what happens when you get older anyways. You might as well start doing it right now. What if I start it and then I don't like it and then I want to pull back? Well, if you start it, then you get points for just starting. Whether you don't stay with it or not, it doesn't matter. Experiment. Figure out what it is that does it for you. I don't know how to begin. And that's why you're here. This whole kind of conference is going to help you to answer the question, what can I do as a student? So for me, the biggest obstacle that we face is the line. Okay, what's this line he's talking about? Yeah, this is the line here, okay? The way the line works is, on one side, you have an interest in wanting to do something. On the other side, you have involvement or action. So let's say, as a result of this, you're learning something new here. You're gaining a certain amount of insight. You're getting the awareness that you need. And then maybe you're even understanding everything that I'm saying, and you're starting to internalize it. And you're starting to apply it to the simulation that happened earlier. You're beginning to feel compassion for these people that I've described, the poor people and the people in these circumstances. You want to help. We all get right up to that line. The hardest thing is to get across that line. To take that risky personal step that allows you to feel like, okay, I want to really help. And maybe I don't have the answers. Maybe I don't know how to do it. But I want to be a part of that process. That, to me, is the most important, most difficult thing for all of us to do. Because very few people get to the point where they actually cross over. And as a result of it, that's the reason why the world that we live in is the way it is. Because we can't do it with just the do-gooders like me out there. So there's only one thing you need to know about human trafficking. Human trafficking is not my problem. It's not my problem, it's our problem. Like that girl Gita, she's asking, why are we not involved in this situation? As consumers, it's our problem because we consume it, so we're contributing to it. And so as a part of that, we should take some responsibility. I'll forget the next one. It's the right thing to do. And lastly, it's so easy. So, what can I do? Well, the first thing is you can learn. And right now, you're sitting here learning. You've done one thing. You've already done your one thing in a year, right? If you go and you start telling other people, when you go back to your schools, you've done two things. You're far ahead of everybody. If you then go to your younger brother or sister and teach them about this, or your parents, you've done a third thing. That's three things. How easy was it to do those things? If you see something that seems a little bit weird or out of sorts, and maybe it's a trafficking situation, report it. That's the fourth thing. You can encourage the police to get involved. Last year, they didn't find a single human trafficking victim. My wife's a journalist. She found lots of them. She's writing in the newspaper about it every single day. Police need to hear from the general public that this is important. Be a responsible consumer. Before you buy a product that you really like, go into the website and see whether or not they have a code of conduct or a policy. Most companies do. If they do, congratulate them. If they don't, say, listen, I like your products. I'm still probably going to buy it, but I'd like for you to have something on there that says you care about this issue. Give. To keep a person in a shelter in Cambodia costs about $3 US a day. That's around 21 Hong Kong dollars. Okay, so even small amounts of money given to the right organization makes a difference. Volunteer. Volunteer within your school, volunteer within your community, find other schools that are doing this, and finally care. So, just in summary, 45.8 million people in slavery. We're helping 0.1%. We're admitting we can't solve the problem. We're asking you to get involved. I hope as part of the next day and a half, you guys talk about what is it you can do, how can you do it to really make a difference. Thank you very much. Family, thank you.
Now it's time for our third keynote speaker. Kylie Uebergang has been a member of the HKA community since 2012, but in addition to this, she has been widely involved in social and political activism in Hong Kong. Compelled by the lack of support given to the children of foreign domestic workers, she co-founded the organization Pathfinders in 2007. Since then, the action she has taken has gone all the way to influencing HK government policies. Now, please welcome Ms. Kylie Uebergang.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. So how are you all doing after the big day that you had yesterday? I listened to Matt talk about the trafficking issues before and Jill about the animals, and I cried for 2 days after listening to those kinds of talks. So I can imagine that you have a lot going through your head. And if I look at your workshops out there, you already know a lot about so many global and local issues. So I just wanted to say from the outset, congratulations, well done for being here. I'm going to tell you a bit about my story. Ellen asked me to talk about how somebody saw an issue and took action. I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got to that point in my life and a little bit about what I learned from taking action and how quite a big global issue really became a very personal issue in my life. And I put the timer on now, I should put that on a minute ago, but anyway. Starting with a big issue. 1 billion people are migrants in the world today. There are 7 billion people in the world today, so 1 in 7 are migrants. Now, a migrant is somebody who moves from one place to another because of the promise of work or a better life. Many of those migrants move because they choose to move, and many move because they are forced to move, because of war, because of famine, because of oppression in their countries. And I think perhaps Matt talked about some of that incident to trafficking. Can you just raise your hand? Do you come from a family who has migrated to the country that they live in today? So at least probably more than half of you have experienced migration. And certainly I am a migrant, and I came to Hong Kong to work voluntarily back in 1999. So one of the types of migrants that exist in the world today are domestic migrants. Now the term domestic means that they work in domestic environments, in people's homes. Cooking, cleaning, washing, ironing, caring for children, elderly, members of family. Gardening, guarding the house, laundry, all of these are domestic worker issues. And as you see from the statistics, I won't read them all out, but of the 1 billion migrants, we start bringing down to there's 2 million female foreign domestic workers in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. By virtue of the fact that they live in people's homes, it is harder to see how they're being treated. And that creates vulnerability. It's very different than people working in an office, in a field, in a factory, in a school. And as a result of that, there are common problems faced by domestic workers around the world. single. They're of the age that it is very normal to have children. That's probably between the age of 20 and 45. At least 3,000 pregnancies happen every year in Hong Kong from those 345,000 women. At least. The problem is, when a foreign domestic worker gets pregnant in Hong Kong, it is very inconvenient. It's often an unplanned pregnancy, it's inconvenient for the mother, and it's also inconvenient for the employer. And although there are laws to protect the foreign domestic workers when they become pregnant, the same laws that protect me when I become pregnant so I can't be fired from my job, it is very common for foreign domestic workers to be fired because of their pregnancy. So they suddenly lose their job, they're pregnant, it's often unplanned, jobless. Within 2 weeks of losing their job in Hong Kong, they become homeless. No money. They're scared to return home. This is a mixed-race child out of wedlock. As soon as they finish working in Hong Kong, even if it's unfair dismissal, they lose access to all social services. They have no medical care. So in these circumstances, when you layer on these problems, these mothers can barely look after themselves, and yet children are born into this. And this is where I'm just going to show you a short video.
Pathfinders, migrant children matter. More than 300,000 foreign domestic helpers, mostly from Indonesia and the Philippines, are now working in Hong Kong. This number grows every year. These women nurture our families, children, and the elderly. They enable families to earn dual incomes and take the household burdens off the shoulders of Hong Kong families. They are usually fully relied upon to support their families at home as well. If these women become pregnant in Hong Kong, they are often unfairly fired and their livelihoods disappear. Unable to find a new job, they soon become homeless and without income. They are terrified of telling their families at home. Out of wedlock, mixed race. These are difficult issues in the conservative Catholic and Muslim societies they come from. As a result, these women feel they have no other choice but to remain in Hong Kong, hidden from society's view. And in doing so, they transfer their vulnerable living conditions onto their children. We see poor living conditions, domestic and sexual abuse toward mothers, and no access to health care for both mother and child. At Pathfinders, we believe that every migrant child born in Hong Kong deserves a fair start in life. We provide critical emergency medical support and shelter for expectant mothers and babies. We educate on legal status and the importance of documentation. We teach life skills for the mother so they can regain self-sufficiency. We counsel mothers on parenting options and provide tools and information to help them protect and nurture their children. We rely on donors to be there for these vulnerable mothers and babies. We need your support.
So that is a bit of a summary on how this very large global issue becomes a very personal local issue. One thing I just want to mention is that the migration experience for most domestic workers is a life-changing and terrific experience. We have worked with a domestic worker in our home for 17 years, and she has raised 5 beautiful children who've all gone to university and gotten great jobs. She has built a house that can withstand typhoons. She's saving for her retirement. Her husband is very active in looking after their family. She has had Skype calls with them every day since she could, since we got a computer. And it can be a very rewarding experience. And that's the type of migration experience that we can all work towards for every migrant worker who comes to Hong Kong and other countries. To try and just tell you a little bit about where my journey started from, because by no means was how I got to this a formula, but I think it's always interesting to understand, well, where does this start? I mean, these big issues, how do you come into contact with them? was born in Australia to a wonderful working class family. My mother and my father, between them, had 15 brothers and sisters. So those brothers and sisters had about 50 kids. So I was one of those 50 kids who hung out all the time and formed a community of people in a fairly small country town. Now, I had actually, not many of my relatives actually even gone to university, and I think I was about the second one out of those 50 kids. My dad said to me when I was about 15, hey, he was reading the newspaper, hey, there are lots of jobs for accountants in the paper, maybe you should be an accountant. I certainly didn't know what an accountant was, but he said, you're good at maths. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I don't know if I took all the advice that my father gave me at that time, but long story short, I ended up becoming a chartered accountant. And I worked in Melbourne, in big firms in Melbourne, Vancouver, and in Hong Kong. So a career tip, you can travel around the world as a chartered accountant. Every company needs one, Hong Kong Academy needs one, and it can be very rewarding. I came to Hong Kong 18 years ago, it was in 1999. It was very exciting to be moving to Hong Kong. I was living in Canada at the time, but unfortunately I hated it. I really did not like living in Hong Kong. I had never lived in a flat before. It felt like living in a box. There was no backyard. The sky was polluted, the streets were dirty. I just couldn't understand how this thriving Asian city didn't look after itself. I didn't speak Cantonese. I was the only one in my group that didn't speak Cantonese apart from my boss. I found that very socially isolating. And I just felt like everyone just cared about making money. You know, I put my perspective over the top of that and I judged that as much as you do when you're quite young. In summary though, I was quite miserable. My dear partner said to me, well, look, I'm happy here and you can do whatever you want to do, whatever makes you happy, so long as we can stay in Hong Kong. And I hope you have that sort of support one day from your parents, and you might, but you'll also realise at the time, that's a big ask, right? I have to make myself happy. I can do whatever I want. Just make sure I find something worthwhile to do in my life in Hong Kong. So, at the ripe age of 30, I started to learn how to make myself happy in Hong Kong. And that involved a lot of thinking and working with a life coach, which was a fun experience, which you'll be using career coaches, I'm sure, very soon in your career decisions. But I got to do homework like, okay, well, what are your dream jobs? Why don't you write about a day in your dream job? Okay, list out all of the jobs that you're qualified and interested to do. I even had to write my eulogy, so I had to write from the perspective of someone reading this at my funeral about what my life achieved. So it really made me think about what it was I wanted to do with my life. And that was a thinking that I certainly hadn't done when I was 15, when Dad said, hey, you want to become a chartered accountant? Because you can get a job easily. The big thing was I was actually really scared to change what I was doing. So I needed a lot of support through this process. And as you think about what you're going to do, I think access that support because it can be really helpful to have people help think things through with you. So in 2001, I wrote these goals for myself to understand local and international social, political, and environmental issues. I was working in a chartered accounting firm. I didn't really understand what was going on in my local community. To provide opportunities for less privileged people. I was from a very privileged background, really, relatively speaking. I didn't know where these people and what they needed. Working with individuals in Hong Kong who were taking action. I was working in an environment where a lot of people just came for a couple of years and then left, or a lot of people didn't really integrate into the community. So these were my big goals that I set for myself. How did I do that? How did I start? So I decided that I would give myself 6 months. I would finish working at Ernst & Young, where I was at the time, give myself 6 months and work with a variety of organisations that were doing things I was interested in. Civic Exchange is a public policy think tank. It engages on environmental issues in Hong Kong, air pollution, urban development issues, livability, sustainability. Mother's Choice cares for orphan children up to about 3 years of age, and also does education in the community to prevent unwanted pregnancy. Crossroads is an organisation that basically takes recycles unwanted goods in Hong Kong and China and sends it to communities all around the world. That's how they started. They've expanded in so many things, but at that time. So I gave myself 6 months working at these 3 organisations. At Mother's Choice, I looked after children. At Crossroads, I sorted out recycled goods. And at Civic Exchange, I got involved in review of a policy on built cultural heritage at the time, which I knew nothing about, but I wanted to start somewhere and do different skills. So at the end of that 6 months, I decided that I grew a bit tired of working with the one-on-one box of recycling goods, one-on-one child. So I decided, okay, policy, you can change the lives of hundreds, thousands, possibly even millions of people. So I decided to work with Civic Exchange. So I got a job at Civic Exchange. I knew them by that point. They had a position available. I took that up and off I started. And I guess I was about 31 at that time. And because part of what I was going to do with them was using my chartered accounting skills, but part of it was developing new skills. So I was going to be well on the way to achieving these goals. So then I started thinking about this concept of having impact, of how your actions, I wanted to have positive impact in the world. And at Civic Exchange, we work on systemic change, trying to change an entire system in some way so that many people benefit. Now, other organisations can work with individuals, working with someone so that you change someone's circumstances dramatically, but one person changes. This little girl, teaching her to read would dramatically change her life. One person. Shipping emissions. So that was one of the early projects I was working with Civic Exchange. Now in 2005, people started talking about the black smoke coming from ship emissions in Hong Kong. Black smoke, bad for the environment, bad for our lungs. 2006, Civic Exchange started working on research, looking into what other ports were doing, city ports around the world. Hong Kong was one of the biggest harbours in the world, certainly at that time. And we all worked out that the airshed that our inner city ports share was shared with 2 million Hong Kong residents. So there's a big impact right in the middle of our city on our lungs. 2008, I think we started talking with community groups, government, ship owners, fuel companies. How can we improve the situation? We can learn a lot from overseas, and we can do things locally. Then in 2011, the ship owners entered a voluntary agreement to improve the fuel quality in Hong Kong harbour. So they could use whatever fuel they like, but as soon as they got into here, where all these people live, they had to use a cleaner fuel. And they were using that cleaner fuel in America and Europe and places like that, so we knew that they had the capacity to do it. But it was a voluntary agreement. The government still were not ready to make that legislative change. And it wasn't really until that successful voluntary agreement, which Civic Exchange helped to shape and run, that 2 years later, the government announced that yes, okay, it would change the quality, it would mandate the changing of quality of fuel in Hong Kong harbour. 2 years later, 2015, that came into effect. So something that we started talking about in 2005 came into effect in 2015. So systemic change takes a long time, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I was impatient. And I wanted to work on things that changed faster than that. I certainly realised in the end, when you're working with one individual and you change their life, it is very rewarding for everyone involved. When their life improves and the impact is by far the impact that you're desiring for. But when you have 500 people who all have the same problem, you realise that you've got to go back and change the system to stop creating this problem. So there's a relationship between individual change and systemic change. But it took me a while to work out. I started in systemic change, I went into individual change. I started looking for organisations that I could help individual people. I still didn't know Cantonese, so I started working with the migrant population. Now, I didn't really plan that, but actually I really related to the migrant population. I had come to Hong Kong to work, and so had they. I had overcome isolation, and so had they. I had learned about and started to love Hong Kong culture, and so had they. So there are aspects of our experience that I shared that just resonated with me, and resonated hopefully with them. And yet, I also knew that my migration experience was very different to theirs. They had very few work opportunities in their own country that forced them to come to Hong Kong, because the opportunities here was too lucrative compared to what they can earn at home. They often took on huge debts just to get to Hong Kong, agency fees, training costs, all that sort of stuff. I certainly arrived and I didn't have a huge debt to pay off. Sometimes it takes them 7 months to pay back their debt before they even get any salary whatsoever. It's actually quite common. They must live with their employer. Certainly I didn't have to do that. Relative to most people in Hong Kong, they earn very little money. Certainly I was earning a lot more. They work super long hours, only 1 day off a week, and they can only go home once every 2 years. So their experience was actually quite different to mine. And so that is where that was the gap that I wanted to work on. So I put it out there that I wanted to get involved in grassroots issues, and so my friend, who eventually became the co-founder of Pathfinders, called me one day and said, "You wanted to get involved in grassroots issues. Why don't you come to Chongqing Mansions and meet me?" Now, I'm not sure, is anyone familiar with Chongqing Mansions? Few people? Hong Kong people? So Chongqing Mansions, and that's the picture of Chongqing Mansions there, that's the front face, that's the nice place. It is a rabbit warren of thousands of rooms. I'm sure most of them do not pass fire safety standards. It is right in the heart of Kowloon, right in the heart of our city, across the road from some of our fanciest hotels. It is an amazing neighbourhood. It is a hub for poorer international migrants, not just domestic workers, but including domestic workers. It has got a thriving industry of trading everything. You walk past there and you are offered mobile phones, watches, jewellery, everything. And so it is really a hub of migrant activity in Hong Kong. So I had not been into Chongqing Mansions before. So my experience in Chongqing Mansions started on the 12th floor of Block E in an apartment that had 3 small rooms, no windows. It wasn't one of these external facing expensive rooms. You couldn't tell when you were in there whether it was night or day. There were about 5 women in the room when I entered, a baby and a couple of young children that were just watching TV. They didn't really look up when I came in. And there were boxes of goods all piled up in corners. I didn't know they were brown boxes. And I hope that's all legal stuff. So I entered this room and came to learn that all of these women had no jobs, no money. They did not have any legal documentation, no passports. Their children did not have birth certificates. They were all from Indonesia. They had all originally come to Hong Kong as foreign domestic workers. They had minimal money for food. They did not feed their babies and children nutritious food. In fact, the water that comes from cooking rice, they use that as a milk for these children. They had all, actually not all, they mostly had lost their jobs because they got pregnant, and then they overstayed their visa. And for some, they had lost their jobs for other reasons and overstayed their visas, and then become pregnant, which is actually something I've found quite common. Once someone overstays their visa and becomes undocumented in Hong Kong, unable to get another job, pregnancy is not that many steps away. One woman had tuberculosis, but she didn't have an ID card, so she couldn't get any medical treatment. Another woman had a stolen ID card. When she had her child in hospital, she presented the stolen ID card, because that's all she had, and the hospital wouldn't let her leave until she showed some ID. So that child was not registered to her, so they couldn't leave Hong Kong, because no one could prove that they were mother and child. So that was the beginning. And we just, Melissa and myself, we couldn't turn away. This wasn't something we were familiar with. This wasn't something we had any idea what to do with. We didn't know where to start, but 3 women became 10, or 5 women became 10 women. We became more through word of mouth. They were desperate for help. They were part of a giving community. A lot of their boyfriends had been refugees and asylum seekers, and while there were organisations in Hong Kong to support refugees and asylum seekers, those organisations were not expanding their service to help the girlfriends and children of the refugees and asylum seekers. So all of the people that we met in Chongqing Mansions came into that category of lost people. Pathfinders was born. Now, we just started talking with these people, learning about their lives. and learning about the Hong Kong system, immigration system, employment system, hospital system, social welfare system. As an accountant, and my co-founder was a lawyer, we had not come into these systems before. We had a lot to learn. So all of these stories really changed my life. I get a bit emotional because one of them really, not just changed my life, but shaped my life. Just give me a second and I'll bring it back here. So it was a 3-month-old girl. Not this girl. And her mother couldn't take her back to Indonesia. She didn't have any legal papers. Her mother was 19 at the time, but when she came to Hong Kong, she was 17. She was trafficked into Hong Kong. When she was trafficked in, she was given a new name, and she was added 2 years to her passport, so she was old enough to get into Hong Kong. So she herself was an orphan in Indonesia, and she was picked up by someone in Indonesia and sent into Hong Kong. She had a baby girl, and she didn't have any documentation. So this child didn't have any documentation. That means no passport, she had no birth certificate, and of course the mother had lost all of her documentation as well, and her documentation was not real to begin with. So it's not very easy to change and re-get your documentation when it was already vulnerable to the fact that she was trafficked in. So this child was not able to enter Indonesia and was not able to stay in Hong Kong. She was stuck in limbo. Social welfare couldn't help because she didn't have the right papers. We didn't understand that there's a real person who doesn't have the papers. So we went to the court and we asked for help. And the courts did see the best interest of the child as we have to help this child. So she was placed in our care, actually, my partner and I. She, with the consent of the mother, and later she was adopted by us, and the mother returned to Indonesia. She got a new passport and returned to Indonesia after she was charged for various crimes in Hong Kong, including having fake documentation. Now, that 3-month-old child is now a very thriving, happy 9-year-old girl. She identifies with being Indonesian, and she is a proud Canadian citizen. She's a loyal Hong Kong resident. She has known no other place. And she's a thriving student at Hong Kong Academy. And just like a side note for how thriving she is at Hong Kong Academy, and I'll try not to cry again, but these issues really, when I remember them, they still touch my heart greatly. When I was talking with her one day about another child who actually looks very similar to her, so a darker skinned child, and she went back to the Philippines with her domestic worker mother. And then her domestic worker mother said she was being picked on at school because she looked different, because she was mixed race. And I was talking with my daughter about that and just, kind of sussing out, well, does this sort of thing ever happen to you? And she said, no, she should definitely come to my school. Hong Kong Academy would never be like that. So hands off to Hong Kong Academy, and I'm sure a lot of your schools are the same, an inclusive, diverse place. So back to Pathfinders. Pathfinders was born now 7-8 years ago. Pathfinders provides food and shelter for these mothers and children, medical care, including accessing social services that are available in Hong Kong, accessing hospitals that they wouldn't otherwise become able to access on their own. Legal support, making sure they have that right documentation, making sure they have a birth certificate in Hong Kong and that they have one when they go back to the Philippines or Indonesia. Counselling, talking with these mothers about what their issues are and unfolding the homeless, jobless, lack of documentation, lack of money, lack of social support, unfolding that and making that small steps. Supporting them when they go home, preparing them for the fact that they have a mixed-race child born out of wedlock, which is really a difficult thing to take back to a Catholic or a Muslim society that they would live in. Educating them on parenting, computers, legal documentation, legal status, letting them know what services are available in Hong Kong. Advocacy, for us that was on a case-by-case basis, taking them to hospital, explaining to the hospital that yes, they are eligible for treatment. That's one way. Advocacy on a systemic basis. We eventually did change that law, that policy that stopped social welfare being able to help people like my daughter because they didn't have documentation. So now social welfare will take an undocumented child and they will then enable that child, should that be the mother's request, to relinquish for adoption in Hong Kong. As Pathfinders has evolved, most children stay with their mothers. Adoption is actually quite rare, but it is an option for those who need it now. And that was not an option that was available before Pathfinders helped change that policy. Most mothers actually take their children home. A lot of those mothers have been unfairly fired in Hong Kong so that they cannot continue to work in Hong Kong. And sometimes we can stop them from not being able to work in Hong Kong in the future. So they might be able to take their child home and then come back to Hong Kong and work. We work towards permanency, finding their path, pathfinders. What is your path home? Where is your permanent, safe and happy future? Is that staying in Hong Kong and continuing to work? Is that returning home? Is that your child and you separating and your child being adopted? What is the permanent future? And that's where we try and get all of the beneficiaries to make it towards. Since the beginning, Pathfinders has helped 4,000 migrant women and their Hong Kong-born children. And that grows every year. And it will be probably another 1,000 by the end of this year. So I'm very proud that we started from one person and we are now helping 4,000, and that will grow. I'm not proud that we have to help 4,000, but we've enriched the migration experience of these women, taking it from what was crisis into a situation that they can deal with. So that's kind of the Pathfinders, how I came into the Pathfinders journey, how I came into the migrant journey. I met one child that changed my life, and then met all of the people who just transformed my whole perspective on migrant workers and Hong Kong. So I have learned some lessons along the way that I'd like to share with you. I think my time is okay. Yeah. It's actually really hard work. And it takes a lot of energy and a lot of your time to start an organisation. It is the most rewarding thing I have ever done in my life. So the hard work is worth it. But how do you keep that going, that drive to continue? And from my experience, you really need to be very moved, really outraged, or really in love with what you are trying to create or what you are trying to stop or change. And that, you can't make that up. That is something that you respond at a time in your life to. And at the moment, you guys are already working on issues that you must have seen and thought, I've got to do something about that. You're just compelled. And for me, that didn't happen until I was 30. For some people, it might happen when they're 11, 13. Some people, it might not happen until they're 80. But once you feel that compelled, and people do call it, you have to be passionate about it. But for me, it's like you couldn't look away. For me, I'm still working with Civic Exchange today, so I had that really gut reaction to what was happening to the children of migrant workers and the migrant workers themselves. But I also had a much more mental reaction to what was happening to our environment and what was happening to the amount of waste in our city. So, I had two passions. I'm still working with Civic Exchange today, so it can come from different parts, but I felt a responsibility to do something about the air in Hong Kong and not just complain about the air. So it can come from somewhere, but you've got to feel it and be driven by it, because it then helps you do all the hard things that are involved in really creating an awareness and taking action that about these issues that takes it up into a national scale, but even at a local scale. This is a local scale issue, and it takes an incredibly hard amount of work. I mean, some of these workshops today, starting small, you will be influencing every person who comes into that workshop. You all matter. One person matters. I matter. I think my life's really important. I'm sure each of you think your life is really important. Certainly my daughter's life, I feel, is very important. This child's life is very important. And the woman that is holding her, her life is uber important. So one life, this feeling of, oh, I don't want to do it because I'm only going to help 15 people. Actually, changing one life, educating one person, opening a perspective. It's great, it is important to start at that one life. So things don't often turn out the way you hope they will. You desperately want them to, but you have to keep trying. We had cases where if you are unfairly dismissed from your job in Hong Kong as foreign dismissed worker because you're pregnant, you know, that's against the law. So you can go to the court and tell them that this has happened, and your employer really would have to pay you compensation. And that is the beginning then of your next journey, because you can afford to go home and you can afford to start again. So we had clients that formula seemed to work, and then we had clients who just were terrified of challenging anyone, challenging the system, challenging their employer. They felt like that because they got pregnant, they just had to go home, they were too ashamed. And so even though we had cases where they had really strong case, they really could have gotten fair compensation, they said no. So you just, you know, there's no one formula for every person. Every person's different depending on where they're coming from in life and what sort of experience they've had. And you have to be flexible and realize, you just keep trying, just keep opening those opportunities. A few more lessons. Questions. I was a chartered accountant, Melissa was a lawyer, we knew nothing about social welfare, immigration, all of these issues. It was embarrassing how little we knew. So I have come to understand there is no dumb question. And if you ask a question in a sincere way, even if it is a very basic question, everyone benefits, not just you. We all don't know the answers to most of these questions. So don't feel that there is a question that is not worth asking. When you ask it in a sincere way, it is always worth asking. Working together, it seems like working together seems like a natural thing when you're taking on these issues. But actually, in the beginning, I felt like I had to do a lot of this myself. I felt like people didn't understand and didn't have the same, weren't compelled in the same way. And of course, I was seeing my daughter thrive, so I knew that this is what could happen when children have the support that they need. And so I thought that I only saw that. I was wrong. And to me, I came to understand that this is a very shared vision and mission for what these people's migration experience, what this humanity, what we owe these people, what opportunities we can provide them. And so my vision now is that when I'm working on something, I stand shoulder to shoulder with other people who are working on it as well. Because shoulder to shoulder, we're much stronger than we are alone. So really share, put it out there, your vision. You will find people that want to work on it with you. A bit boring, but you really, really, really need to learn how to use money wisely, because you will need money for your mission, and you will need to prove to others that you can be trusted using their money to expand your mission, to expand your impact. So that's a really good thing to focus on from, and you already have from now, but just reiterating, it's not just for accountants. I work with a lot of social workers and a lot of speech therapists and a lot of legal experts, and basically we all have to work out how to create budgets around the impact that we want to work on. So learning how to use money wisely is a really big lesson that I learned as well. And finally, being inspired by others was an incredibly important driver for me as well. As much as the children and the mothers that I worked with inspired me, I also needed to be inspired by professionals who were doing similar things or had been working in this area for 20 years longer, or who were working in an international sphere and so that they had really put some deep thinking into this. Because I was working in an environment where otherwise I was introducing this issue to a lot of people. And a lot of people it was their first experience of this. No, this doesn't happen in Hong Kong. I'm like, yes, this happens in Hong Kong. So then to actually start working with people who had been working on this migration issue and some of what they would call the disbenefits of migration over the last 20 years actually was really inspiring for me. And certainly at Civic Exchange as well. When you talk about some of the local issues, and it seems so hard to change, but it's so logical to change them around air quality, around living standards, around whether we should protect nature. You know, you need to be inspired by looking at what's going on internationally. And it helps shape what is possible. So I remember when one sociologist came to Hong Kong and had worked with migrant workers before in Hong Kong and had written a couple of books. And she was amazed at this issue. She understood this issue immediately. She understood what happened to women after they went through this issue. And so really speaking with her was like filling my lungs with air at a time when I actually really needed it the most. So work alongside these people. If you can't find them locally, look at what they're doing internationally. And try and help if you can, and just learn from what they're doing. And I think finding your own path. So I just cannot take my hat off enough for you being here today, learning about global issues, because I just can't relate to your level of awareness at your age. You know, I was playing with my 47 cousins in my country town, and here you are learning yesterday about trafficking, learning about what's happening to the bears and the animals in certain communities. That is actually, you know, it's inspiring that this is what you are learning about at this point. And when I think about where was I being shaped at your age? For me, I think it was witnessing. I was bearing witness to my parents creating impact in their own community in small ways. Looking after their parents, looking after our aunties and uncles, our cousins, like creating community. You know, my mum would paint anyone's house. My dad was a fireman for 45 years, a volunteer fireman. So I didn't think about it at the time. It was just normal. But my values around community were being shaped. When I was 30 and I was miserable and I felt quite isolated in Hong Kong, I had to really think about what was important to me. I hadn't really thought about my values before. And I had to think about, well, what was it that would make me feel nourished and secure in this environment? And for me, I realized that I needed to be active in my local community to feel happy in Hong Kong. Now, back then, the internet was just a baby. So when I was growing up, to be fair, the internet was not there. TV was obviously a part of my life, but now you have a much broader understanding of what's going on in communities that are physically far removed from you. I didn't have that. You have that now. And with that comes a broader awareness. You know about so many more issues. And that's a lot of responsibility for you to know about these issues. We come from a country, Hong Kong, that is part of China. We immediately have an expanded community that's very different from our physical community. So this sense of being involved in your active community globally soon really translates very well locally. And my advice on your journey is that when you think about your community and how a global issue can turn local, you know, your home is your community. Your friends are your community. Your school's your community. Your domestic worker, your doorman, your driver, the bus driver, the neighbour, they're all part of your community. The stray cats in your neighbourhood, the people that you play sport with, the landfill where your waste ends up, the air, the water, the paper that we use, all forms part of your community. And we know that there's a lot of things happening in our communities which are unfair or unjust or unsustainable. And with your awareness of global issues and learning about what different communities are doing, you are so well placed to translate that into local action at your level, starting from your one person. So a lot of you already have a domestic worker in your house. A lot of you can enhance experience of that domestic worker. A lot of you can ensure that she leaves Hong Kong or leaves the country that you live in more enriched for her experience. And certainly your lives will have been more enriched, we hope, by her being in your life. And so I think in working, there's my time, perfect timing, in working in your local community, working out, starting from what you see in your everyday life, I think you are very well placed to make impact in the world, and I wish you luck, and I thank you very much for listening to me today.
Welcome back to our last time. Now it's time for our final two keynote speakers. First we have Mr. Peavy, who currently leads expeditions all over Southeast Asia to inspire students and teachers to connect with nature. He's done all sorts of environmental activism and loves getting people outdoors so they discover our connection with nature and learn to respect our planet. Please welcome Mr. Peavy.
Before I start, I just want to say thanks to Ms. Thorne, are you there? And to Mr. Riley, and of course all the students that have been helping and volunteering, and you guys for coming and making this possible. So thanks for everyone for making this whole Global Issues Network successful. It's been a great time. So I want to get started. This is what I do, get outside and explore. And that's really what my whole message is. I think we spend too much time inside, in classrooms, in buildings. And what I want to do, my whole message is to get you outside playing, learning, exploring. Now, I want to talk about some of the projects that I've done. Is there anyone here that dreams of being a rocker? Like, yes. Heavy metal, big stadium, singing. Yeah, I see some people back there. Me too. I always wanted to be a rock star, and it was really kind of a dream growing up listening to rock and roll, having all these fantasies of playing on stage and all the fans. Ah! And we turned that into a service project. This was the name of my band. I was in a band in Kuala Lumpur for you teachers, the Benchmarks. We were rocking. Smell the Music was one of the CDs that we released. Mostly for the adults, we were Spinal Tap, if you know that band. That was kind of our inspiration. But what we did is we used our music to create a program called Rockin' for the Environment. And basically, there we are, rocking. And we were awesome for like 4 or 5 people in the audience. It was great. You can see that weird-looking guy. He's playing guitar, pretending like he can sing. But what we did was we started Rockin' for the Environment. We started this program to raise money and raise awareness for environmental issues. And the way it started, quite honestly, was some of the band members were all teachers at International School Kuala Lumpur. They went to a turtle sanctuary, and they saw a plaque that said, "Thanks to Mount Kiara International School for raising funds." And they got jealous. And they said, "We're from ISKL. We need to have a plaque too." So that's how it started. Quite literally, they were like, "We want to have an ISKL plaque at the turtle sanctuary." So what did we do? We started a program that it was really, really small at first. We started in a school just like this, in an auditorium like this. And we got our teacher band, and we got a couple student bands, and we charged admission at the door, and people came. And we collected funds. And we did this for about 6 or 7 years. And over the course of those years, it grew. And over the course of those years, we also raised about $30,000 US for sea turtles, for coral reefs, for dugongs, for sun bears, for orangutans. And you can see some of the various programs. So my main message there is you can use music. Are there any musicians in the audience? Anyone play in a band? You can use music to make a difference. You can use it for a program. And I think you should. It's a lot of fun. It started really small, like I said, in an auditorium like this. But the first year we raised about $2,000 US. The next year we raised a bit more. The next year, by the end, we were playing at a public place in a mall downtown Kuala Lumpur, and we had locally famous musicians joining us, and we were on the radio. So start small and grow your program. That's one of my main messages. But you can see over the years, we did this pretty successfully. Some years were better than others. Our biggest year was the orangutans. For some reason, people love the orangutans. But you can see, we played with this lady, and there's proof, the benchmarks back there. Does anyone know who this is? It's Yuna. I think it's obvious she enjoyed playing with the benchmarks more than Usher. I mean, if you look, she was quite shy, honestly, when we met her. She was a teenager. And she came out and she played the orangutan rock for us. And the next year, she went to New York and she started slowly getting famous. So I launched her career. But it was a good time. And my point there is you never know, because honestly, she was a really shy teenager, kind of like you guys. She agreed to come and play. And 5 years later, she was really famous in America. And so that was pretty cool to be able to say we played the show with her. And so you never know what's going to happen when you start on these adventures and doing your programs. And there we are. I think is there anyone from ISM? Yeah. Who's that guy? He's at ISM now. Eric Richardson. If you know, he was a drummer for our band. Obviously, you know, we're pretty cool, you can tell. We're like real rock stars, the Twin Towers in the background. By the time we had done this program, and we had done it for 5 or 6 years, we started getting interviews in the magazines, and they actually did a photo shoot with us on top of a building, so we were kind of like U2, and it was really cool. So, you know, the main message there is if you start small, and you just are consistent, and you keep growing, and you keep going, you're going to grow your program, and eventually you'll get some attention, whether it's media or other sponsors, are playing with really cool people. And the bottom line is, it's got to be fun. This is another one. Now, does anyone here like to ride mountain bikes or ride cycling? Cool. So I hope you're starting to see you can use music, you can use cycling. We did a program called Green Riders. And what we did, just me and my one friend Jamie, we took bicycles and we rode from South Thailand to Bali. And we did it in about 6 weeks. And along the way, we were filming documentary series. So we're making movies. So if you can ride a bike, or if you can make a movie, you have something to contribute to a project, especially to meet the global issues or the Sustainable Development Goals. Use your talents. And the way that one was played out was, I just had this idea I wanted to ride a bicycle around. And it evolved from me talking to my friend Jamie and saying, hey, I want to ride a bicycle around for a couple weeks, do a bike tour of Asia. And then he said, well, yeah, I'd like to do the same. We got contacted by a guy that makes bamboo bicycles. And he said, hey, if you're going to do this project, why don't you do it and raise awareness for sustainability? And I'll sponsor you. I'll build a bicycle for you, and you can basically ride that bicycle and test it out and tell me if it works. And it mostly worked. This bit right here, you can see the overall bike weighed about 18 kg, and the first day we were riding, I had about 30 kg, so you know, about 50 kg of weight, not including me. It was a bit heavy, and that back pannier kept falling off. And so it worked. I had to figure out how to fix it in the field. So one of my favorite stories from this, we were riding the bicycle, it fell off, I fixed it, it fell off, I fixed it. Finally we got to a town, and I was running around in South Thailand drawing a picture. I wanted a hose clamp. I wanted a ring that I could clamp down on the back. I have no idea how to say that in Thai. And so I was going into all these hardware stores and I was acting it out, like, in drawing it, and these people were looking at me like, who's this what does he want? Finally, I went to this one shop, and this lady understood that I wanted a clamp, so I could clamp it down onto my panniers and stabilize it. And she came out with this whole range, like 500, from like this big to this big. And I made it work, and it happened that we got it fixed, and it survived the rest of the journey. So the guy that made the bicycles learned a little bit about the engineering of the bike. We learned how to fix how to get a hose clamp in Thailand, which wasn't really the intended lesson, but it worked. And so we rode from South Thailand all the way to Bali. Now you probably noticed in between there's a bit of water. We got on ferries, and one of the funny stories, we bought ferries. We bought the tickets to the ferry, and we got on the ferry, and just thousands of people. We were going from Singapore to Jakarta. And so we got on this ferry, we bought the first class tickets. We basically were on the ferry for 48 hours. We kept seeing like people down below, we kept seeing people up above, but we didn't quite know what was going on. And one day at dinner, I was talking to the guy that was sitting across from me at the table. And he said, hey, yeah, nice to meet you. And I speak Indonesian, so we were speaking a bit of English and a bit of Indonesian. And he said, yeah, good to meet you. I'm glad you're on the ship. I'm the warden. I said, warden? He's like, yeah, this is a prisoner ship. They were shipping people back that had been violating passports and immigration laws. So that was quite an interesting journey. And it was nice to be on the boat and talk to lots of the folks. They basically were illegal workers that had gone from Indonesia over to Singapore and Malaysia, gotten caught, and then they just get shipped back to Jakarta. But we didn't quite know that we were going to be on a prisoner ship. So when you set off on these adventures, you never know what's going to happen. You never quite know, that that's where you're going to end up. And you know what? Every single person on that boat was very friendly. It was a nice journey. But being on a boat for 48 hours with bamboo bicycles, we were the weird ones, not anyone else. And there you go. You can see these two guys don't quite know what they're doing. These two guys are really ready to rock and roll. When we started out, we were joined by some triathletes, and they had the sad job of trying to teach us a couple of tips and lessons for riding the bike. And yeah, you can see, well, I think I don't need to say much more than that, do I? You can just tell they weren't ready. So, and there we are in Singapore. The other bit about this, I'm still friends with these people. So on that 6-week bike journey, we met lots and lots of interesting people. People like you guys, people doing projects, people doing community work, and I'm still friends with them to this day. So if you embark on these journeys, embark on these projects, you're going to meet people, you're going to meet friends, and if they're doing similar stuff, you're going to have common interests. So you're going to meet some cool people. Anyone like to paddle? Anyone like kayaking or rafting? You can do a project. This one, because I hadn't punished myself enough on the bicycle for 6 weeks, I decided I wanted to do some more crazy adventure and paddle around. And this time, we didn't have bamboo, we had kayaks. And we basically paddled around the island of Phuket. And along the way, very similar formula, we made documentary series. So for you teachers, if you look up Green Paddlers or Green Riders, we made a curriculum guide that you can download, a free curriculum guide to all the documentaries. Because along the way, we kept filming these stories about local communities, local advocacy groups, local NGOs, and the work they were doing for conservation, for sustainability, for the environment. At the end of the project, we wanted to share, and the whole purpose of Green Riders and Green Paddlers was to make a local documentary about issues and the communities that are making a difference, and then share that with schools. So I really encourage you to go just Google search Green Riders Asia or Green Paddlers and download the curriculum guide, and it's meant to accompany the documentaries. And along the way, we're stopping in at doing beach cleanups, meeting with the local groups, groups that are advocating for a cleaner environment and doing their part. We're at the Maicao Turtle Conservation Sanctuary. So while Green Riders was mainly focusing on terrestrial issues, our forests, our land-based issues, this one was focusing more on marine issues. So we got to meet some of the biologists, learn about the sea turtle program, and we also got to meet the shark guardians. Does anyone here know the shark guardians or work with them? Cool. Yeah, they're based in Bangkok in Thailand. And I know for a fact, here in Hong Kong and in China, there's a large percentage of restaurants that serve shark fin soup. Am I right? And so, you guys know the environmental issues associated with that, right? They catch the sharks, they chop off the fin, they throw the sharks back. And so when you lose that apex predator from the reef, the ecosystem starts to collapse. So we were lucky, we got to work with these guys. We got to work with the turtle sanctuary guys, we got to work with lots of locals doing beach cleanups. The whole time, just raising awareness for all these marine conservation issues. And it was cool because, you know, we got some attention, and earlier in some of my workshops, we were talking about how to get media sponsors and how to get attention, how to get people to pay attention to your project. And this is one of the ways, if you can get in the local papers or local radio. Oh. Now, I told you all the really good ones, and this is one of my points. This was something that a friend of mine wrote to me and said, hey, I want to buy some uniforms for my village football team, but they don't have any money. They all live in poverty. They want to have a football team, but they don't have any uniforms or any money. And I said, oh, I don't have any money either. They didn't like that reply. But I said, I've written a few books, and I can sell these books. This book is a teacher's guide for environmental education that I published. This book is a children's book about getting back to nature. This book is a novel that I wrote. It's about a time that I was homeless for a few months, and I was camping in the woods every night, homeless, but during the day, I was going to work and working at a job. And this one is a book of poetry that I wrote, just talking about the strange and interesting characters you see in cafes in America. And so my idea was, if you buy one of the books, I'll donate the profits to these organizations, and you'll buy your uniforms. And I raised about $5 or $6. Didn't work. That project failed. Green Riders really worked really well. We reached hundreds of thousands of people during 6 weeks that watched our videos, that were following us on Facebook and our Twitter and our blog. Green Paddlers, you can see we were in the newspapers. That worked. I think it's because of this photo. I think that's why this project didn't work. I honestly, I don't know why it didn't work. It just, people didn't like it, or they don't like my books, or, you know. But my point is, your project may not work. That's okay. Because guess what? Give me a new idea, and that's fine. Because I realized I did want to do this kind of project. I wanted to empower some of the local communities. And you know, even though this one didn't work, buy a book, support a village, I thought that was really cool. I thought people would be like, yeah, let's buy his books. Like I said, I raised about $5 or $6. It just didn't work. But this one spurred a new idea. At Home is a local community cooperative in Bali, where I live in East Bali. And this one is working. We've gotten some donations to start a cooking school. And the way it works, these ladies that live in the village, they're going to run a cooking school. We're going to supply the equipment. We're going to give them microloans, like a Kiva type thing, to buy their equipment and buy the food, or buy the, you know, whatever they need, the resources. And then they just pay it back, interest-free loan. Are you guys familiar with Kiva type loans, like microloans? Something like that. And it's working. We've got our first students coming from United College in a couple of weeks to try out our cooking school. And we're in the process of training these ladies. They're really good cooks, but they're really shy and they don't speak English. So it's hard for them to run a cooking school until we train them a little bit, and that's going to teach cooking. Because remember, cooking and teaching cooking are two different skills, right? And the fact that they don't really speak English and that they're really shy. And so everyone thinks that, you know, your projects are going to be like this, like, wow, there's going to be thousands of people coming and you're just going to just kick butt. You know, you're going to have a huge project, but this is what it's really like. It's not the big stadium rock. You know, it's like this. It takes grassroots effort. And we've had meetings with these ladies. In the very first couple of meetings, you can see what we did was got their name and their skills. What are you good at? What are your talents? What are your skills? So we've already talked about music. We talked about riding bikes, paddling. But you can see most of these ladies are good at cooking. So we thought, hey, we have students coming for trips. We need to eat. Why don't we do a project with a cooking school? And that's where the idea came from. If you're from Indonesia, you'll notice something about the names. Siti, Rani, Uni. There's two groups. There's the Muslims and the Hindus. And they don't always get along. And so the thing is, in this community, that's sort of a way to get them to come together and to work together. And that's just the way it is in lots of places. And so that's another sort of hidden benefit to this cooking school is people that normally wouldn't work together or hang out together will be doing that for the mutual benefit, for the good of the community. And so that's not something we planned. It's not something we actually thought of, but it's something that's happening. And you can just see. So, you know, like I said, everyone thinks it's going to be huge, and that's one of my big points for you guys. No, don't. Keep it small. Keep it local. That's a lot more effective. This is better than this. So keep that in mind. Start small. Start local. And you have to go through this process of finding out what people are interested in. What are their talents? What are the skills? What do they want to do? They almost all have the same skills. It's cooking, making offerings, and massage. And so with those three main skills, we're going to do some projects in the community with tourists and with my school groups, like the cooking school. So these are sort of my main points that I want you to take home. If you take something you really love to do, like music, cycling, biking, cooking, it doesn't matter what you love to do, combine it with something you care about, and you'll have a successful project. That's my simple formula. It's got to be fun. It's got to be something you enjoy doing. This one is really important. Just try it. Passion is the result of action, not the cause of it. We always think it's the reverse. Like if you're passionate about something, then you'll do it. But that's not always the case. If you do something, you'll discover that you like it. You'll discover you feel passionate about it. You got to try it out. And guess what? Like my book idea, if it doesn't work, it's okay. That idea that didn't work gave me another idea that hopefully is going to work. And lastly, overnight success takes a really long time. Most people that you hear, oh, they just had overnight success. They've been doing it for a decade. They've been doing it for a long time, and finally they get popular or trendy, or someone discovers, oh, yeah, that's really cool, and then it gets popular. But they've been doing it slowly and steadily for decades. And this is why I do what I do. Because, and this is a family I took hiking in Bali, and I think this is true. You've got to get out. You've got to get into the community. You've got to go hiking. You've got to go have a fun time, experience something, and get outside and enjoy life. So that's my message. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch, there's my website, Twitter, email.
I'm not even paying attention. I'd rather be listening to the Ed Sheeran album. Where are we in terms of how we're feeling? Awesome, okay. I see a lot of 5s and 4s. Ooh, I see a 2 though. Okay, we'll get you up to a 5 by the end of this, hopefully. So, as they said, my name is Michi Ferreol. I graduated in 2015, and I am currently a learning experiences to again do me a favor and stand up. Don't worry, I'm not making you squat or like bolt like screws into anything, I promise. So, okay, so remain standing if any of the following that I say applies to you, okay? So remain standing if any of the things that I say apply to you, okay? Remain standing if you know what emojis are. Okay. Remain standing if you have a Facebook, Snapchat, or Instagram account. At least one of those. At least one of those? Interesting. Okay. Remain standing if you have taken a selfie. Or a groupie if it's a group selfie. Okay. Remain standing if you know what on fleek, they, and throwing shade mean, or have heard one of your friends use it. Remain standing, this might knock out some of you. Remain standing if you were born after 1984. We got one more teachers. Alright. Well, congratulations. Congratulations, if you're still standing, you're officially certified millennial. Alright, you guys can sit down. So, of the ones who were still standing, and even the ones who were sitting, some of you may actually be millennials, you just don't know it. How many identify with this word? How many don't know what this word means? Okay. A millennial is essentially someone who was born between the late 1980s and the early 2000s, which I figure is a lot of you, right? Millennials are characterized by loving technology and growing up around it, right? We get information at our fingertips, we're able to Google something and get the answer right away, we're idealistic and bold, and we just want to get out there and act as part of our community. That sounds like a lot of you guys here at JIG specifically. Well, I'm a millennial as well, as you can tell. This was me around 9 years ago. I was an 8th grader at the International School Manila. And like you, I was sitting in seats very much like these, thinking about how I could actually do something given my 8th grade status. Currently, I work at the African Leadership University, as I said, which is in Mauritius, which, as you can see here, is a tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's so small that they actually needed to add a dot to like indicate it right there. And there, I designed learning experiences for 300 of our first and second year students. It's pretty new, so it started about a year and a half ago. And we're hoping to grow into a university system that now caters to, hopefully, one day caters to 3 million students. But this is not going to be about me. It's not even going to be about you guys. It's going to be about all of us, right? As millennials, we're in a very, very specific point of our lives, and we're given so many tools to actually do something out there that's not only fulfilling, but actually makes an impact. And the question that I've been asking myself a lot throughout this GIG conference has been, how do we do that? And not only how do we do that, how do we actually do that in a way that's different from what others have done, right? Because our parents have tried this, their parents' parents have tried this, their parents' parents have tried this. What is different about us, and what can actually we do to make that impact? All of us want to make a difference, and we want to do it now. That's why I assume all of us are here. And we're hoping to answer this question as a wrap-up to the weekend. I know you guys have heard a lot of speeches and workshops throughout the last few days, each with their different topics, right? We went from human trafficking to talking about saving bears, to today talking about how we can do fun things to raise funds for the environment. But all of you have separate causes and really interesting issues that you are passionate about, and I didn't want to just stand up here and tell you about education, even though that's what I'm really excited to share. But I want to talk in general about how we as millennials can use what we have to tackle the issues that you actually are specifically passionate about. And I'm going to insert change the world. So there's an easy way to remember this, and the secret is to be swag. And you can add like the action if you want. But these letters each stand for something that we'll then build on in the coming months and hopefully years. Okay, lesson number 1. Build together or differentiate. So I'm going to try something. Each time you guys see something red on the slide, I'm going to ask you guys to say it for me. So let's try this out. Lesson number 1. Build together or differentiate. Great. So I think a lot of what happens with us millennials is that we think that we want to start something on our own, right? It's really cool to be the 15-year-old CEO of a startup. It's really cool to be that Mark Zuckerberg that launches Facebook from his dorm room, right? But chances are someone's already tried that thing that we want to start, and someone's already done it before. So the first thing I want to share with you guys is to remember to do your research. And doing your research can help you do these 3 things. 1, it'll help you tweak your existing idea. You could see that maybe there was an article somewhere a few years ago that stated that someone tried to do exactly what you were doing, but it didn't work out because of these so-and-so reasons. But you could learn from that and tweak your idea and actually not make that same mistake. So that's 1. 2, it'll help you partner with organizations who are doing similar work, right? You could find out that there's already actually an environmental conservation club within your area of the city, and you can partner with them to do things specifically for your middle school. So that could be a great opportunity for you guys to get involved as well. And the 3rd, it can help you scrap your idea altogether. Honestly, if someone's out there and has done it well, it's probably not a good idea to do it again, right? I talk about Uber and Lyft a lot, which are 2 ride-sharing apps that we use in the US. And Lyft essentially recreated what Uber did, and now there's a huge competition between the 2 of them. The problem with not doing your research first is that what might end up happening is that instead of actually working together and collaborating, we end up competing for limited resources, limited funding, and just limited attention from people who we actually want to pay attention to us, right? So there's definitely a need to do this research first. In an example, so in 2012, 2 of my best friends and I started this organization called CAMP, which you heard Valeria talk about. This is us back in, I think this was 9th grade, and it actually had the word swag on there. I didn't intentionally do this, by the way. It had that word on there. And we started this organization without doing any of that research. The point was to help students from the Philippines apply to schools in the United States, in Singapore, in the UK for college through a mentorship program. And we didn't know that during the time there were already organizations doing similar things. It helped us to do our research 2 years after the fact because we were able to tweak our ideas. So there was an organization already called Education USA who was giving free information. So instead of just providing that information on our website, we decided to host that mentorship program instead. We could partner with organizations who were doing country-specific things. So this organization was doing specific things for Australia. So we said, oh, we're focusing a lot on the US and the UK, you're doing Australia, let's partner together. And finally, it helped us scrap an idea. We initially had an idea to put all the list of scholarships on our website, but there's already a startup called Education PH doing that, right? And because of doing this research, we were actually able to come up with a much stronger organization. Cool. Lesson number 2. Stay positive. Great. So as I said earlier, I work at the African Leadership University, and our goal is to educate 3 million students and make 3 million leaders by 2030. So just as a thought experiment, let's play a numbers game a little bit here. How many universities of Harvard size, Harvard is 5,000 students, would we have to create to absorb just 20% of Africa's high school graduates? Okay, think about that for a second. So let's say this little guy represents 5,000 students, or 1 university, okay? How many think that we would need 100 universities? Okay. How many think that we would need 500? Okay, let's see some hands. Okay. How many think we need 1,000? A lot more hands. That's actually more than half of you. We actually need 9,000 universities in the next 30 years. That means that ALU will have to create 300 universities But it's important to remember that your scope doesn't have to be that big. Anything that you're doing at your school, in your city, contributes to that overall effort. And if we have one of you here, one of you in Jakarta, one of you in Manila, one of you in Mauritius doing something, then collectively that is making an impact. At ALU, we have this thing called the 7 grand challenges. We give this to our students during their first year when they're supposed to choose missions and not majors. We tell them that these are the 7 big things plaguing the African continent currently. But we don't just tell them that these are the big challenges that they have to face and then just suddenly just go off and try to solve them. We also tell them that there are 7 large opportunities. So for each challenge, there is an equivalent opportunity as well. And it is up to you guys to figure out what that opportunity is. So don't be overwhelmed and don't be dismayed by the stats. Definitely find the opportunity in the challenge, and you'll be able to rise above those statistics. Lesson 3. Wait patiently. Great. You know, as millennials, I'm sure you guys all relate to this. We are used to getting things at the click of a button, right? Like, we really want things now, and we want to get it done now. But as Kenny was just saying, those things take time, right? Like, overnight success takes a really long time, as we said. ALU's goal is to educate 3 million leaders. Right now, we're at 300 students. That is only 0.0001%. And you know, we could look at this and say, oh, it's not going to happen definitely within my lifetime, maybe even the lifetime of my children's children. But it is a goal, and we're working towards it. And even though we're hacking away at that slowly, we need to keep doing it for the sake of the larger vision, right? And I hope you guys also do the same. We're actually opening a second campus in Kigali, Rwanda, in May. So that will be another 300 students. So that will be fantastic. It'll bring us up to 600. But this is currently our campus in Mauritius. Imagine, hopefully by the end of my lifetime at least 100 of these universities spread across the African continent. It would be absolutely fantastic. Lesson 4. Do nothing. Great, thanks guys. I think it's important to remember that all of the communities that we're working with and working for are accepting us out of goodwill, right? Like, all of them have a specific way in which they want to be served and have a specific way in which they think that your product or your service is going to actually make a difference. We can't go in there assuming that we know what they want, right? Everything is co-created. Like, all the individuals that we're trying to serve and help, we need to involve them in the process of creating something with them. 90% of startups fail, and 42% of those fail because of, quote, lack of market need, which is just a fancy way of saying the product actually was something that the customers didn't want, right? So to avoid that, it is important that we include them in that process of creating whatever that service or product is. We need to observe, we need to conduct focus groups, we need to interview, we need to make sure we live as one of those people, because if we don't, then we can't have that empathy. Part of this too is humility, right? We have to admit that we don't know everything. So this is important in order to actually do something that's effective and makes impact. The fancy term for this is human-centered design. We throw this word around a lot at ALU, especially in our entrepreneurship class. But human-centered design is the process of building and testing. So reiterating, building, testing, going back and forth until you have something for sure that will match the needs of the community that you're serving. As an example, at ALU, we wanted to build a first-year experience that was completely unique and actually catered to the needs of our students. But we didn't know what actually makes a good leader in the African sense, but also, I guess, in the corporate world or in the working world. So what we did was we sat down hundreds of CEOs and we asked them, hey, what do you actually look for in your new hires? Hey, what do you actually think makes a difference in terms of success at your organization? And we came up with these 7 meta skills, which are now the core of our undergraduate curriculum. So as you can see, asking those questions and really engaging with these people in that way really helped us there. And finally, lesson number 5. Get ready for the future. And a series of memes. So these next few slides have a lot of memes on them. Just be ready for that. The first one, try something new, right? There are a lot of things we can do now to help prepare us for the position that we might be in 20, 30 years from now. You know, right now we're still living with our parents, we still have to submit homework, have to get good grades, but we can do those tiny things right now to be able to prepare us for being in that big position once we reach that age. Trying something new is definitely one of them. Another one is getting out of your bubble. So being at gin is one step of doing that. Continue to interact with your community. I know it's difficult because you go to school in the morning, by the evening you're tired, after you go to soccer practice, you're driving home and you just want to put on some like Netflix and watch TV before you go to bed, right? But getting outside the bubble on the weekends, maybe trying to find a way after class to see things and meet new people would be absolutely great for your development and understanding of the community around you. Get ready for the future by just being a sponge. So absorbing all of the different things that you think you need to learn in order to get to where you want to be. And that includes, you know, if you want to learn how to code, go learn how to code now. You won't have that time later on. If you want to travel to a specific country to learn about the cultures there, go do that. If you want to come to Hong Kong for the gym conference, definitely do that as well. Build up on those skills as well, those hard skills. Like one of my biggest regrets was definitely not learning how to code in college or in high school. So definitely get and do that. And there's a lot of free courses out there where you can do that now. You can go online, go to Code Academy, you can even download apps on your phone like Swiftly. All of these different things are easy ways for you to get involved and start learning those skills. And finally, get mentors, right? So gym is a good place to start for that. All the speakers that you've had, all the workshop presenters, those people could be mentors later on if they're in a field that you want to be in. Your teachers could be mentors. You know, even after you leave the 8th grade, you know, this particular teacher who has this interest in this specific subset of skills could help you later on to build whatever you're building. So remember, build together or differentiate, stay positive, wait patiently, assume nothing, and get ready for the future. And what does that spell? Yeah, be swag. Awesome. So I'm going to cheat a little and add an extra thing. There's one of my favorite movies is a movie called For the Love of the Game, which is about a baseball pitcher in his like late 40s who tries to make it big in professional baseball. And he does this thing when he's on the mound, he's facing a batter, and everyone in the stadium is looking at him, and he feels the pressure of the pitch coming up. He clears the mechanism. He basically drowns out all the voices in the stadium, listens to his own heartbeat, and delivers the pitch. Clear the mechanism in real life, guys. My own parents told me not to go to Mauritius. I think everyone told me not to go to Mauritius. But it has been the best decision I've ever made. As a wise philosopher named Taylor Swift once said, haters gonna hate, right? And those haters can stay hating as long as you listen to what you want and you believe in what you're doing. So definitely keep that in mind as you guys are going out there in the world and being